Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Melissa. Yes, I am Charles Berman. I am the receiver of taxes for the town of North Hempstead, and I've been receiver of taxes for 9 years. I'm also a resident of Roslyn for more than 30 years. So every time I come here, I do go all around the town, but every time I come here, it is like a homecoming. So very happy to be here. I want to thank Bryant Library for hosting us, and I want to thank all of you for coming today. So today we are going to do a workshop with you regarding the Nassau County's new reassessment program. And we are going to go through in detail the whole process, how to file a challenge to your new county reassessment. So for those of you who have followed me in the past, you know, we come out and we do this every year. For the past 8 or 9 years, the county actually stopped doing reassessment every year. However, there was a new assessment roll published every year, and over the course of time, we realized that it was very important for everybody to have one of these challenges on file, because although the Department of Assessment, which assigns the market value to your property if you have a Class 1 residential property, stopped doing annual reassessments, the Assessment Review Commission, which is the other agency we're going to talk about that receives these challenges, these grievance applications, they were actually receiving massive amounts of applications, and they were actually reducing very high rates of the challenges. So it became, very quickly to us, it became apparent that really everybody, to protect themselves and to stay ahead of the curve and to understand the whole program, they basically had to have one of these challenges on file. The challenges in the past, for the past 9 years, were directed at completely different than what we're facing now. So although we're in a brand new program and they're back to doing reassessment and assigning new market values, the bottom line is it still is important to have one of these challenges on file to protect your rights. And it's my belief that you should be filing one of these every single year, regardless of what the information is that you've already received from Nassau County. So just to review, we're going to review the timeline of events as an overview. As I said, every year the county publishes a brand new assessment roll, and they do that on a date called the taxable status date. It's the first business day in January every year. So this year, January 2nd, 2019, the county published this brand new roll. However, as I said, for the first time they did reassessment since there was the first time since 2009 when they published a roll January of 2010. So the values are greatly different than they have been for the past 9 years. Everybody's value most likely went up. Not everybody's value went up at the exact same rate. So all boats rose, but all boats did not rise together. Bottom line is there is a brand new reassessment roll that was published earlier this month on January 2nd, 2019. Once the county publishes this assessment roll, it begins this grievance period where people have the legal right to file a challenge to the value that was assigned to their property. So normally, the grievance period is from the beginning of January to March 1st. In previous years, including last year, they extended it. They extended for different time periods for different reasons. This year, by agreement, they decided to extend it to April 30th of 2019. So you actually have time to do all of your research and then decide, how you're going to proceed with these grievances. But you're not facing a deadline in 4 or 5 weeks. When we scheduled these seminars, we scheduled a lot of them in January and February, not knowing that the period may be extended or would be extended, even though it had been in the past. So we are doing a lot of these from now to the end of the month and next month too. And as Melissa told you earlier, we're also videotaping this presentation so they could put it on North Hempstead television, and it'll be on the town website and also on YouTube. So for anybody who wants to rehear the information, it's going to be readily available. So as I said, we're now in the grievance period. It began January 2nd, and this year it will go until April 30th of 2019. After the grievance period closes, the Assessment Review Commission that's receiving all of these grievance applications has a very long period of time to review them all. And they don't have to make a decision until the grievance period ends. So in the past, in the recent past, although they were receiving literally hundreds of thousands of these applications, they were making mass, decisions, and all the decisions pretty much for the Class 1 properties were returned and published by Labor Day. This year, we don't know what's going to happen because the actual challenge is much different than it has been in the past, which we're going to get into and I'm going to explain in a little while. But you may or may not get your decision by Labor Day. It may go later, but they have until March of next year to give you a decision if you file a challenge. So the decision can either be they're going to agree to lower your value or they're going to keep it where it is. But you are going to get a decision letter from the Assessment Review Commission if you file a challenge during the grievance period. After the grievance period ends every year, there's a 1-month window of opportunity to actually appeal a decision that you don't agree with. So if you get denied a reduction, you have the right to file a challenge, to file an appeal to that decision. And the way that works is it's called the Small Claims Assessment Review if you have a Class 1 property. And you would have to go to Nassau County Supreme Court and get a docket number. Actually get that at the county clerk's office. You get on the calendar at Supreme Court, and you actually get a hearing date before a hearing officer, and they hear your case. They hear your appeal to the decision from the Assessment Review Commission. So there's a 1-month period every year to file an appeal of a decision from the Assessment Review Commission. So for anybody who filed the challenge last year in 2018 and you got a decision this year that you were denied a reduction and you want to challenge that, as long as you sent back your letter that you don't accept the decision to the Assessment Review Commission, this coming April you can go to the county clerk, get a docket number to get on the calendar in Supreme Court. The docket number costs $30. However, if you win your case, you get that refunded. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those SCAR, Small Claims Assessment Review, appeals, and those cases, and how that might work. But there is only a 1-month window that's never been changed or extended to file an appeal to a decision. Also in April, the roll that was published this year in January 2019, next April, that roll becomes a final roll. Now it's called the tentative roll. Next year it becomes, in April, it becomes a final roll. The Department of Assessment continues making some changes to that final roll based upon these SCAR decisions. But this is the assessment roll that they will ultimately use to create tax bills in 2020, 2021. So you have to remember you're filing a challenge now for the assessment roll that's going to be used to create tax bills for the 2020, 2021 tax year. So you want to make sure that everything you submit to Assessment Review Commission indicates that you're filing a challenge for the 2020, 2021 tax year. After April 30th, budgets start to be formulated. First, the school budgets and the library budgets. As you know, you vote the third Tuesday in May for for the school budgets. Within the budgets are the tax levies. So once those are approved, that information goes to Nassau County, and they put together the tax levies, the proportions that each class of property is going to pay. I already mentioned Class 1 property, or 1, 2, and 3 family homes. There are 4 classes of property in Nassau. Class 2 property are these big apartment buildings that are mostly co-op and condo. Class 3 properties are all the public utilities. And Class 4 properties are the commercial properties, but some of them also have a residential component, so that would be a Class 4 residential property. Each class of property pays a different proportion of the tax levy in every district. So, and it's called an adjusted base proportion because it's not exactly the amount of assessed value translated into the proportion of the tax levy. It becomes adjusted. So, because they use different methods to come up with assessment. For Class 1 property, they're using market value. For Class 2, 3, and 4 properties, they're using something else called a capitalization and net income. So not to be too technical, but the county, they have formulas to come up with these adjusted base proportions. So once they have the tax levies, once they have the adjusted base proportions, and then in the end, when they have their final assessment roll, they can actually compute tax rates. Once they have tax rates, they just apply that to the final assessments, and they can create tax rolls. So it is a process. It does take a period of time before each tax bill comes out. So as you know, if you get a tax bill directly from us every year, school tax bills come in October, and then the general tax bills, which are the town and county taxes and the town and county special district taxes, that comes in January. So everything that you're filing a challenge to right now during this grievance period relates to the assessment roll that will be used to create taxes, school taxes, and general taxes in the 2021 year. So just remember that we're going to show you more about submitting this and submitting information, but everything that you're going to be filing will say tax year 2020, 2021. We have the AR1 forms with us, the actual grievance applications. I believe we have them in the back. Okay. So if you haven't seen this before, you don't have one, we do have them with us. You'll be able to pick one up when you leave. But everything on the AR1 form, it will indicate that it's for tax year 2021. So sometimes I get asked about how do you file a challenge to your village taxes, because village taxes are very high as well, especially in North Hempstead. In North Hempstead, as you know, we have 31 villages. There are only 62 in Nassau County, so we have half of the villages. Their grievance process works basically the same way as the county grievance process works, only the whole calendar is condensed. So if you live in one of the villages on my right-hand side in that first column, you can see that the grievance period will begin soon. It's going to begin February 1st, and it's going to go only to the third Tuesday in February. You have to get your grievance application from the village, directly at the village. Now, villages are separate. They're called separate assessing units. So many of the villages, they're allowed to create their own assessment rolls, and they have their own tax bills and tax year. We don't, my office doesn't send out the village taxes. So if you want to file a challenge to your village assessment, and you live in one of the villages on the right-hand side, February 1st to the third Tuesday in February is the grievance period. They actually have to tell you a decision by March 31st. And if you don't agree with the decision, you do have the right to file an appeal. So they finalize their assessment roll on April 1st. And then in May, you're allowed to file an appeal, and a decision has to be made during that month. And then by June, they have their final village assessment roll, and then they create their village tax roll based on that. So as you know, village taxes come, for those villages, they come in June, and you have until around the 4th of July to pay. So it's the same process, it's just a condensed calendar. For anybody who lives in one of the villages on the other side of the screen, on the top, those are villages that are mostly in Great Neck. Their calendar is in the fall, so that's in October. And for anybody who lives in one of the villages on the bottom of the screen there, those villages are mainly in Manhasset and North Hills, although Roslyn Harbor's there. Those villages do use the county assessment roll, so by filing a challenge to your county assessment, you're also filing a challenge to your village assessment. So just to review, anybody who owns property in Nassau County, pay taxes in Nassau County, you have the right to file one of these challenges to your assessment. As I mentioned, there are two agencies that you have to know about in this process. One is the Nassau County Department of Assessment. They're the ones that actually do the assessment. They're the ones who assign the value to your property. And then there's also the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission. They're the ones that receive these challenges. So the Assessment Review Commission does have these quasi-judicial powers. They can make changes to the assessment roll, and they're not limited to what they can do. They can change your assessment to anything that they deem to be the correct value. As I said briefly, there's a new assessment roll every year. This year it's much, much different than the roll published last year because of the reassessment. So the first thing you have to know if you're going to file a challenge to your assessment is what is this value that the county's assigned to your property for 2021. So the county started by mailing out assessment notices in November 2018 indicating a value. They've actually made some changes to those values that they indicated in November, in some cases based upon conferences that were held in November and December with county officials, or based upon other information that they may have received from property owners. So they did make some changes, but they actually did publish a final tentative assessment roll. I shouldn't call it final. It's actually just the tentative assessment roll, but that's what everything is based on right now on January 2nd. So you need to know what that value is that was published on January 2nd that was assigned to your property. So the county has mailed out these notices of tentative assessed value. I just got mine last night in the mail. So they are, I guess, in the mail. So some of you may have it already, maybe some don't. But we're going to show you how to find it online on the Nassau County Department of Assessment website. But the first thing you really need to know is what is this value that the county has assigned to your property. Obviously, if you disagree with it, and also in order to protect all of your rights, you need to file a challenge to that value. So we're going to review how to do that, how to file the appeal. And the application for correction, as it's called, does require certain information about your property. And this year, really, because the new assessments, the new reassessments are based on comp sales that the county used to determine your new market value, you do want to file information about sales as well on your grievance application. In the past 8 and 9 years, that really wasn't necessary to file a successful grievance application. Now, it actually is. So the application is going to require certain information, including sales and comp sales information. So before you begin your actual application, you're going to want to accumulate a lot of information, especially if you decide to do this yourself. As I said, the first thing you need to do is to find out what's this value the county's assigned to your property. You're also going to want to know the sales that we use to determine your value, and you're also going to want to know what's on your property record card. What is this inventory that the county actually has listed for your property? You want to review that very closely and make sure it's correct, because if it's not correct, that's a red flag. That means they probably pulled the wrong comps, the wrong sales to come up with your market value. So we're going to show you all of that. And the best way to find all of the information you're going to need is on the county's websites. And as I said, there are two agencies, Department of Assessment, Assessment Review Commission. They both have websites that are very important, and you're actually going to want to get on those websites and familiarize yourself with all the information before you begin your application. But you do want to accumulate all the information you're going to need to file. So again, the filing period now for this year is January 2nd, 2019 to April 30th, 2019. A lot of times we get asked, should we hire a representative? Should we hire an attorney? Should we do it ourselves? You know, what should we do? You know, in the past, I would recommend for most people who had a straightforward case, the whole challenge really was based on, you know, what is this fractional level of assessment that the county always uses? They always use 1/4% or always have. They had used 1/4% since 2007. So every year the challenge really boiled down to whether or not that was correct. And really these attorneys, and there were 7 big firms representing 85% of the filers in Nassau, every year they would challenge that, and it was based upon something called the ratio study. They would look at all the sales that had happened within a year. They would compare that to the actual frozen assessments that were on the assessment rolls. And in almost every case, the sales price was higher than the value that was on the assessment roll. So simply, they were able to prove that the taxable value that was being used, the 1/4% of the frozen number, was not actually 1/4%, it was lower. It was lower, it was not 1/4% of the actual sales price, the actual value, the true market value. So every year, the same process would happen, and they would win, and they would actually cause the Assessment Review Commission to lower the fractional level of assessment for their clients, and that, by extension, went to everybody who filed a grievance. The people who didn't file, they were frozen, and they were frozen in 1/4%, and for the people who did file, their cases most likely was settled at these lower fractional levels of assessment, which ultimately led to lower market values. But that was the basis for the whole challenge. So, you know, it seemed in most cases pretty obvious that if they're just filing a paper for you and charging you 35, 40, 45, or 50% of everything you save, you could file the same paper. It didn't require a lot of information. And if they won the case, you, by extension, would get the same benefit. And that actually did happen, you know, for a lot of people. You know, very few challenges were based upon sales. I used to tell people that you could look for sales, but you probably won't find any that are going to help your case, so you could leave that section blank. Now, you know, it's almost 180 degrees the opposite. That whole section that was on the previous grievance application, for those of you familiar with this process and have done this, you know, you did this last year and in the past 7 or 8 years, that whole section is gone. There's no more challenge to the fractional level of assessment. That's because the county lowered the fraction from 1/4% to 1/10%. So that basically wiped out, for the time being, that challenge. You know, now it would be very hard to prove that even by the most recent sales, that the fraction is not 1/10 or 1% of the sales price. So anyway, so going back to the question of whether or not you should hire somebody, ultimately that's going to be up to you. But the challenge is really, it's completely different than it was last year and in the previous years. during the last county executives program. So, you know, in the end, you're going to have to decide after you listen to everything, but, you know, you may or may not want to hire a representative, depending upon, you know, what you think you can handle. But regardless of what you decide to do, you should still go forward and file a challenge. Anyway, it's very important that you don't file a duplicate filing. So if you decide to do it yourself, don't hire a company for the same tax year, 2020, 2021. Also, don't hire two separate companies. Once you have a duplicate filing, that basically brings your application to a standstill, and that won't go forward until that all gets sorted out. Most likely, you know, it's going to move you to the back of the line. And as I said, you know, last year there were 200,000 grievance applications, so you don't want that to happen. So don't do a duplicate filing no matter what. And as I, you know, mentioned earlier, but it's important to keep in mind, Assessment Review Commission, they still can't do anything but reduce your assessment or keep it the way it is. By filing a grievance application, it doesn't trigger any kind of field inspection. It won't trigger any kind of reassessment where it might lead to a higher value than they've already published. So they really can only do one of two things. And, you know, that's still the same as it has been in previous years. There really is no downside to filing. The only question is to decide how you're going to go forward to do this. This is also the grievance period where somebody could file a challenge to the class that their property's in. So if you remember, I mentioned there are 4 classes of property. If somebody thinks that they're in the wrong class of property, this would be the time to file a grievance application. Also, for anybody who filed for an exemption in the fall and was denied by the Department of Assessment, this is also the time you would file a challenge to that decision. And, you know, just keep that in mind because there are 3 different grievance applications that Assessment Review Commission accepts, and they all look very similar. But the form that you would want to file if you have a Class 1 property, which is a 1, 2, or 3 family residence, is the AR1 form. So remember, the form has to say AR1, and it has to say for tax year 2020, 2021. Don't use an old form, and don't use the wrong form because that will disqualify your grievance. The other form, the AR2, that's for Class 2, 3, or 4 properties. And for AR3, that's for anybody who did file for an exemption who got denied. Both agencies do offer some assistance, although, you know, depending on the year, it may or may not be very good. And this is if you decide to go forward and file for yourself. Both agencies do offer some help. I also want to mention that if you decide to file pro se, file on your own, your initial grievance application with the Assessment Review Commission, and you get turned down, remember you do have a right to file an appeal the following April. You can hire a representative just to represent you for the appeal. So you could do both. You can actually file pro se. If you lose, you decide that you do want to file the appeal, but you don't think you could handle the SCAR hearing, represent yourself in an actual, you know, in a court case. You can hire a representative just to do that. Although last year, for the first time, we started hearing that some of these big firms wouldn't take anybody on for SCAR unless they filed with them the initial filing with the Assessment Review Commission. So getting back to, you know, help, you can get some help from both the Department of Assessment and the Assessment Review Commission. We're going to show you a few ways to get on the Assessment Review Commission's website. We're going to also show you how to use the website. But they do have a direct number, which is 516-571-3214. And you could also email them through their website for help. So we're going to show you a little bit more about that. And also, I'm going to mention, this is very important, that although the application, the AR1 form itself, just asks for basic information, and there are several sections that have to be completed, you are allowed to add additional information to your grievance application in the form of attachments. So some people may have some very valuable information to add. You may have a problem with the structure of your home. You may have a problem with the foundation. You may have an engineer's report. You may have some sort of architectural plans that would actually show that there's a problem with your assessment. You may have some sort of legal issues going on that might affect your value, your market value, that you'd want to submit. Some people may actually just go out and pay for a fee appraisal. And if it comes in much lower or lower than their assessment, they can submit that as an attachment. Those cost, I guess, anywhere between $500 and $700, but it's less than what you would pay a representative, I'm sure. But, you know, there may be other circumstances. There may be environmental problems in certain areas, or anything else that would help your case. You can submit additional information as an attachment with your grievance application. So we're going to show you, you know, where you do that, and how to do that. So you want to really just be all set up front before you actually go forward and fill out your grievance application and file it. You really want to go through like a checklist. And the first thing you have to do, as I said, you have to know the value the county's assigned to your property. The next thing you have to do is you have to come up with your own estimate of your home's market value. Now that's the same thing as it's always been in the past. You had to come up with a lower value. But in the past, that was easy. I mean, people could just look at other assessments in their neighborhood that were being lowered, or they could simply just do what the firms were doing and taking their value and reducing it by 40 or 50%. Really, you can't come up with a value like that now unless you can justify it with sales. Everything is based on comp sales. So you really have to do your sales research first and then come up with your lower value. Now the value, this part is the same as it's been in the past. The value that you put on your grievance application has to be lower than the value the county's assigned to your property. And the other thing that's always the same is the county will never go lower than the value you put on your grievance application. But it has to make sense. In the past, people would say, but it doesn't make sense. It was counterintuitive, these lower values. And, the answer was, well, the grievance application really isn't based on the market value. It's based on you challenging the fractional level of assessment. Now, you actually are challenging the market value. So you do have to do all your sales work and come up with your lower sales first and come up with a lower value, because that part of the application is mandatory. So that's really the second thing you have to do. We're going to show you how to do that. We're going to show you how to compare your estimate, your lower value, and compare it to the value of the Department of Assessment assigned to your property. You're going to actually go through it, complete the application, and we're going to show you the whole thing in a minute. But there's two ways to file. One is this paper application, and the other way is to do it online on the Assessment Review Commission's website, which we're going to go through that with you. There are benefits to filing online. One is you get an electronic receipt, which you don't get if you file the paper application. And also, we're going to show you in a little while, if you do the process online, you actually have, there's a feature on the program that allows you to go back into the program and make revisions. So if you file the paper application, it's very, very hard to make revisions. In fact, we had somebody last week who filed, and then they heard the presentation, they realized they made mistakes, and they actually have to go back to the Assessment Review Commission and speak to somebody there in person to file a revision. Because if you just filed another application, it would look like a duplicate filing. So there are benefits to filing online. Either way, there's a process to do it. If you're doing the paper application, you get all your information on the paper application and then make a copy of it and all the additional information that you're going to submit. The best way to do it would be in person, and that would be at 240 Old Country Road on the 4th floor in Mineola. Assessment Review Commission is set up in a room there. It's actually within the Department of Assessment, but they have their own area where they're receiving the applications. And they'll actually, if you fill out the application, you bring in all your paperwork and make a copy of everything, they'll take in the original, stamp it in and keep it, and they'll take the copy, stamp it, and give it back to you so you'll have a receipt that you filed. You are allowed to file your paper grievance application by mail, but if you do that, you really have to do it certified mail, return receipt requested, so you have proof and a record that you filed and the date you filed, because you don't get any kind of receipts from Assessment Review Commission if you file the paper application. So the best way, again, is to do the paper in person. And the other way to file this is to go online. So we are going to show you how to go online in a minute, and we're going to show you the application. But most importantly, the websites, because that's where you're going to get all the information you need. And you need to go to the Nassau County Department of Assessment website first. And we're going to show you that address in a minute at www.mynassauproperty.com. But you need to go there first because that's where you're going to find your notice of tentative assessed value if you don't have it yet. And that notice has some important information on it. But most importantly is the value that was assigned to your property on January 2nd, 2019. So this is what you should have gotten in the mail. This is the most recent mailing. As I said, I just got mine last night in Roslyn. So you may or may not have it. But this is what you're looking for. We're going to show you in a few minutes how to find it. It is online right now. But as you can see, it has the date. It has the address of the property. Obviously, if there's a mistake with your address, you're not going to get it. So that might be one reason you don't have it. If you didn't get it, you look it up online, you see there's a mistake with your address, you have to go get that corrected at the Nassau County Department of Assessment. On the other side, it says something, PARID. That stands for the parcel ID, and that's a string of numbers. That string of numbers is important because that's actually the way you enter your parcel if you're filing online. If you don't have this notice and you don't type it in exactly like that, there is a way to look up your parcel ID online, which we're going to show you in a little while. But those numbers are very important where it says PARID, because that is your section, block, and lot. The first two numbers are the section, the next three numbers are the block, then there's a space, then the next four numbers are the lot, and then there's a 0, which is for the computer program at the county. And it also tells you your tax class. This is where you could check your tax class. I know mostly they're correct. This is usually something you don't have to worry about, but if it's wrong, this is when you would file a challenge to it. You don't want to be taxed as a Class 2 property if you're a Class 1 property. It's completely different rates. So you can check that. That's on the notice of tentative assessed value. Now, the new value on this form, on the form, it's in the middle column. When we look online, we look on the computer, it's going to be where it always is, in the first column. But on this form, the brand new value is in the middle, and the old value is on the left. And then you can see the difference between the values on the right. So usually I would say that the greater the increase, the more likely, the greater the impact it's going to have on your taxes in 2021. But as I said, all values went up. So it's not unusual to see an increase because we're looking at comparing a frozen assessment value or maybe a value that was reduced numerous times from 2010 to 2018 to a brand new value and a brand new reassessment value. You can also see that they changed the fraction for the first time since 2007. They changed it from 1/4% to 1/10%. That was really to negate or to stop the challenge to the fractional level of assessment. They're coming in with something lower than it could actually, be reduced. So it is 1/10%. But in almost every case, the taxable value, the last value, tentative assessed value, that's the fraction of the market value that's being taxed. That's the fraction that's on the tax rolls and on the tax bill. In all of those, in most cases, the 1/4% of the lower number is still higher than the 1/10, 1% of the higher number. And then actually, there's a reason for that because there's a law that those values can't increase by more than 6% a year or 20% over 5 years. So by reducing it from 1/4% to 1/10%, they actually, in almost every reassessment, they're not affected by that law. So you'll see that that's reduced, but that doesn't mean that your taxes are going to be reduced. The top number is the number that you're working with, that you're filing the challenge to. Everybody most likely has an increase at different rates, but everybody most likely has an increase, and that's actually what you're challenging. And those values were based on comp sales, recent market sales that we're going to show you how to find, and you're going to actually dispute that with other sales because there are plenty of sales out there, and the whole thing is disputable. So you're going to have they have their facts based upon certain sales that they used, 5. You're going to have your own sales, your alternate sales, and then you're going to file your case based on that. So this notice is very important. Most likely you should have gotten it or will get it in the mail shortly, but we're going to also show you how to get it online. So I think now we can go to the grievance application. Right, so this is what the AR form looks like, and this is the AR1 form. So you can see in the upper right, it does say AR1. You want to always make sure you're using the correct form. And on the other side, in the upper left, it does say tax year 2021. So the first thing they're going to ask you in Part A is to put in your section, block, and lot. And you need to know your section, block, and lot to file a grievance application. So there's a couple of ways to find that. One, as I showed you on that notice of tentative assessed value, it is in that string of numbers. It's, it might be hard to decipher, but it's also on your deed. So everybody should have a copy of their deed somewhere. Your section, block, and lot is on your deed. If you live in a condo, a Class 1 condo, there are 2 more numbers. It's the CA number and the unit number. The CA number identifies the condo in Nassau County, which condo it is, and the unit number is the unit inside of that condo. So if you live in a condo, you do need to have those 2 additional numbers. The other way to find your section, block, and lot would be if you get a tax bill directly from my office. It's on your tax bill. Also, we're going to show you how to look up your property on mynassauproperty.com, which again is the Nassau County Department of Assessment website, their property search feature. We're going to show you how to look up your property. If you don't know your section, block, and lot, you can look up your property by using your address, and once you find it, you'll see your section, block, and lot there. But you do have to find that. You have to put in the entire property address on that line, and then where it asks for the owner's name, If the property is owned, again, you want to look at your deed. If it's owned jointly, husband, wife, you put both names. If it's owned by one, you put one name. And, many people put their properties in trusts or life estates. So if it's in a trust or life estate, you skip the line, you put other owner's name, you put down the name of the trust or the name of the life estate. So you want to fill out this entire section, make sure it's accurate. Now, Part B has to do with your estimated value. And we're going to show you how to find sales. And we're going to show you how to find your own sales to come up with your own value. So your values should not be within 5% of the county value. It should be lower. Because ultimately, if this case goes to a small claims, to a SCAR hearing, and you're asking for something within 5%, hearing office is just going to adjourn the case and settle it based upon what you were originally assessed for. So you want to be more than 5% lower. But you have to have something that actually makes sense, that actually can be justified by the sales that you're presenting. So we are going to spend time on sales, and we're going to show you how to look up sales on the Nassau. We're going to show you how to look at the sales that we use to come up with your value, and we're going to show you how to look up alternate sales that are going to help your case. And one place that you're going to look for sales actually is on the Nassau County Assessment Review Commission's website. So we're going to show you how to do that, but you are going to have to come up with a lower market value. And remember, the number that you put in there, the county will never go lower than that number. So the first thing it asks in this part is for tentative assessment. That's actually the fractional level of assessment that's being used for taxes. So you'll look at your notice of tentative assessed value, and you look at your market value. You look at 1/10 of 1% of that. You look at your taxable assessed value. That's what that means, that tentative assessment. And you put that number in there. That's what was published on January 2nd, 2019. You put that number in there. The next line, it asks for your what your estimate of market value is. Should be lower by more than 5%. So you put that number in. And then it's going to ask you, is the property offered for sale or under contract? That's a yes or no question. So if yes, you have to put the price in. So you have to fill in all the information in Part B. This part is not optional, it's required. And they have 3 questions now. So in the past, for any of you who've done this yourself in the past, when you got to this part, you just had to put in a lower market value. You had to have it there, but that was the only thing you had to answer. Now you have to do, answer this whole section by looking up your current, your reassessed market value, finding taxable value, which is 1/10 of 1% of that, putting it in the first line, coming up with your lower market value for the second line, and then answering the question in the third part. You have to do the entire section. The third part is the same as it's been in the past, Part C. This is where you're telling Assessment Review Commission, if you're representing yourself, this is where you would tell them that. You would check self. If you're representing a relative, you can do that, but you also have to submit a letter of authorization appointing you the representative. But you put in, if you're representing yourself or you're representing a relative, you put in your name as the representative, your address and your telephone number, and your email address. You put all that information in. So that's very important. So those first 3 parts, they're mandatory. They're almost the same as they were last year and in the previous years, except Part B, they're asking for a little bit more information. Part D is actually the same as it has been in the past. And this is actually where you would indicate that there's a problem with the property record, with your property record card. That is the inventory that the county has on record for your property. And you would put that information in here if it's going to help your challenge, help your grievance application. And that's actually one of two bases filing a challenge, is challenging the information the county has on record for your property record card. So we're going to show you how to find that in a minute. But if they actually have some of the important features and factors about your home in their records incorrectly, then they use that information to pull market comps that are much higher than they should have been. And that means that you most likely were overassessed. So this could be the basis for your whole challenge if you find a mistake on your inventory. First, you would enter that information here in Part D. If you fill in 1 or 2 or 3 of the lines in this part, once you don't have to do the entire section. You don't have to answer every question. You also only want to put information in this part that's going to help your case. This is also the part of the grievance application where you indicate where you can add attachments, the attachments that I spoke about. So if you have additional information to attach, and you have multiple pages, you actually, where it says other facts at the bottom, you just write C attachments. Now, as far as submitting attachments, you want to make sure you put your name, your address, your section, block, and lot, and tax year 2020, 2021 on every page you submit, and number your pages. That's very important. So this is the part of the application where you can submit attachments. If you're doing the paper application, you would just attach it to the back of the application. But remember, your name, your address, your section, block, and lot, and tax year 2020, 21. And more, if it's more than one page, number the pages. So an inventory challenge is actually, could be, your entire challenge. So if they have any of the features of your property, any of the important factors wrong, that could be the basis for your whole challenge. So we're going to show you how to look at your property record card. Very, very important. So that is the first 4 parts. It's pretty similar to the past. And this part, Part D, if there's nothing wrong with your inventory and you don't have any additional attachments, this part you actually can leave blank. It's optional. So that brings us to the first and very important website, which is Nassau County Department of Assessment's website, www.mynassauproperty.com. So you go to that address, and the first screen on that website is a security screen. County hired a vendor to actually run this website for them a couple of years ago. Before that, it was very easy to use. Now, it's difficult because of the security screen unless you know how to, manage it. So firstly, you see a security screen, and you have to indicate you're not a robot. It shows you some window panes, and you have to tell it which ones have bicycles or something and mailboxes. And then you see some script, and you have to type in what you see, and then you see some elongated script that you may or may not be able to decipher, and you have to tell it what that is. And so this is very annoying. There's a much better way to go, and that is everybody should set up an account with mynassauproperty.com. That's what you have to do in order to use this very important website. It doesn't really come with instructions, so we're going to go over that right now. The first thing you do is you can see there's a toolbar up there, and at the very end of the toolbar in very small letters it says Login. So you click that. You click Login. So for anybody who hasn't used this before and you don't have an account, the first thing you're going to want to do, it allows you to create an account. So it's going to ask you simply just for an email address and to create a username and password for the account tied to that email address. So you want to do that. And then you click Create an Account. Once you do that, you go back to this search screen, you click Login, and then you put in your username and password. Now you're actually online with them, and you could use this as much as you want. If you as long as you logged in, you could do multiple searches. So, you know, people may want to, the first thing you want to do is search your property, but, you know, people doing more investigation, more research, they may want to search other properties as well. So you can do that easily once you're logged in, and you can use this screen. Now, there's two ways to find your property, either by section, block, and lot, if you already have that information from, you know, your deed or from your tax bill, or you have your notice of tentative assessed value, and you can figure out that PAR ID line. Or if you don't have your section, block, and lot by now, you can actually search for it by the, underneath it says property search. You just put in the address of the property, the name of the street. Don't add, you know, street, road, avenue, boulevard, place, you know, the things that follow the name of the street, just the name of the street, and then the town, the mailing address of the town. Put the town and the zip code. You search for the property. So the first thing you want to do is find your own. So as I said, you can do it either way, by section, block, and lot, or by address. But when you click search, you should see your property. So you'll know it's your property because you'll see a picture. There it is. You'll see a picture. And there's a lot of, all the information that you need about your property is on this website. And you just need to know, you know, what each thing is to click to get the information you want. But this is on the home page, you can actually see the values. So as I said, on this one, the brand new value is on the left-hand column. On the notice of tentative assessment, it's in the middle. But on this one, it's on the left-hand column. That notice of tentative assessed value only shows you this year and last year. Once you get on mynassauproperty.com, you could see the previous 3 years as well. So there may have been changes depending upon how many grievance applications were filed and how many reductions were given. So you can see all of the values. You also can see the fractional level of assessment that was used. You can see the taxable assessed value and the other information regarding the taxable status date as well. So there's some very important things that you're going to use this home page for. The first one would be to look at your inventory, your property record card. Also, you're going to want to find, everybody wants to know, what are these sales that the county used to come up with my assessment? You can find that on this page too, as well as how they actually made the adjustments when they were assessing your house as a subject of the reassessment, and they used these sales. They actually were comparing your house to the homes that sold, and then they were making adjustments for the differences between your home and the home that sold each time. So you can see, you know, some of these adjustments that were made. You know, it's hard to actually figure out if they did it correctly or not, but you can see what they did. You can see the adjustments. But most importantly, you can see the sales, and you'll be able to see, you know, your inventory. You'll be able to see the inventory of these homes. So, you know, trust me, if there's a major mistake on your inventory, then they pulled sales that have the same, those same values that are not in your property, and therefore all those sales are probably inaccurate, and that really would be the basis for your challenge. So here you could actually find all the correspondence that the county sent you beginning last year in November. On top of the picture, it says correspondence. It says the 511 and the tax impact notice. You can see everything that was sent, including the notice of tentative value. So, last year we all got these initial notices telling us there was a reassessment and what the new value would be. Then we got these tax impact notices, and they showed us what our taxes were in 2017, 2018, and then hypothetically, they use the same tax levies and the same, remember I told you about adjusted base proportions, the same adjusted base proportions in 2017, 2018, but they put in, the new assessed value versus the old assessed value. They came up with hypothetical rates, and using those hypothetical rates and the new value, your new value, they came up with new taxes. They're all hypothetical. Somebody just pointed out to me earlier, before we began, that on the 2017, 2018 taxes that they were shown, it didn't include special assessment that they actually were billed for and paid, because special assessments don't have tax rates. So somehow, when they computed these tax impact statements, they're extremely hypothetical, and you could take them with a grain of salt. The only thing is that they did show you two ways that the new assessment might be used. One would be if they just use it in 2020, 21, and the second way would be if there's an increase, if they phase in the increase over 5 years. It seems like what we've learned, up to this point in time, that the governor is going to agree to put the phase-in his budget. It's not going to be separate legislation that, the Assembly and the Senate is going to debate and decide. And in the end, the last thing that I heard was he's going to put it in his budget for April. So it seems like at this point that they are going to transitionalize in the increases. But when you're filing a challenge, you are filing a challenge to the value that was set on your property January 2nd, 2019. If you win and they reduce that value, they'll just phase in the lower reduced value. But you're not filing a challenge, to 20% of your new value. You're filing a challenge to your new value. So just keep that in mind. So even though, it looks like they are going to phase it in, they're going to phase it in for everybody. So you're pretty much, almost in the same place that you are if they use the whole thing. I know it shows, and for people who are having increases, it shows it mitigates the increases, and for people who are having a big decrease because, their values didn't go up anywhere near as much as the average value in their districts. It averages and it phases in that decrease. It does. They don't. It shows that you don't get it all in 1 year. That part is probably true, but as far as the actual tax numbers, they're not going to be close, or they're not really going to. When you get the tax bills in 2021 and you look back and you look at these notices, in almost every case the numbers aren't going to be the same. But this is the part of the website where you can actually see all that information. So if you didn't get it, or you lost it, or you need to see it again, everything they've mailed since November 1st, they have on the website, including the notice of tentative assessed value. So you just click that part above the picture. This website also it makes it easy for you to go look at other properties just by clicking area maps. Either way, you could see like all the parcels surrounding your home, and you could click on any one of those parcels. It'll bring you to the home page of those parcels, and you can look at those values. So a lot of people in the past, they've always liked to look and see what their neighbors are assessed for, what people on neighboring streets are assessed for, what people in their local development are assessed for, and what people in their school district or similar homes in other districts are assessed for. So that's very, very important information. This also has another feature called Ask the County Assessor. We're going to show you that in a little while. This is a brand new feature. But this is one thing you could do with Ask the Assessor. It's a shortcut right to the Assessment Review Commission and the Assessment Review Commission grievance application. So we're going to show you that. There's also a video on the Assessment Review Commission website, as well as the Department of Assessment website. So Department of Assessment website, if you go to Ask the Assessor, you're going to see the video. If you go use Ask the Assessor and you can go to the Assessment Review Commission website, there's a link there. You could click videos, and that'll actually take you through the whole grievance process online. But the video, you can watch it for whatever it's worth. If you click Ask the Assessor, that's the video from the Department of Assessment. So they're basically explaining the reassessment to you. But I heard they're about 6 minutes, and it might have some additional information. So that's on the top. On the bottom, we're going to show you in a second property description. You could also get all your tax bill information, including the value of your exemptions and how much you're saving after values. But skip to property description. That's where you're going to find your property record card, which we're going to click on in a minute. And you can look at recent sales. That'll show you sales that most likely won't help your case. Those are sales that the Department of Assessment, it may not be the sales that we use for your actual reassessment, but those might be the sales that they would use to defend the value they put on your property. So most likely you're not going to want to use those sales, but they're there. And the last thing that all the way over on your right-hand side, it says Prognos, or Tax Class 1 Residential Prognos. That's the actual program for the reassessment. So if you click that, you're going to be able to find the sales that we use to do your reassessment. So let's go back to property description for a minute, because this is very, very important. This was actually the basis for your reassessment. The features, the inventory on your property, the factors on your property, they're supposed to find sales that are comparable to your home. What they're talking about is that the inventory of those homes, the inventory of your home, is supposed to be comparable. So that's another reason why you want to check the sales that we use for your reassessment. You want to make sure that that's actually true. So if you click property description, it brings you to your property record card. So you could see certain things there, beginning with it'll tell you tax year 2020, that means 2020, 2021. The school district your home is in. It tells you your lot size. So you want to make sure that's accurate. You want to make sure that that's accurate, because if it's showing that you live on 2 acres and you live on a half an acre, that's a big difference. That could be a major factor, and that has to be corrected. So you would indicate any mistake you see on this property record card, you're going to put it on Part D of your grievance application, but then you're also going to want to notify the Department of Assessment, because you've got to get that fixed. So now there's a new way to notify assessment about inventory problems, and that's on that Ask the Assessor feature on the home page of mynassauproperty.com. That's another thing you can use that page for. You could actually notify them that there's a mistake with your inventory. But you have to notify both agencies, Department of Assessment and Assessment Review Commission, as part of your grievance. So it shows you lot size. It shows you if there's a location factor. So, there are both negative location factors and positive location factors. So this one is showing Long Island Railroad. That means that this property is near or somehow abuts, maybe the back of the property, the side of the property abuts the Long Island Railroad property, and then on the other side might be railroad tracks. So that's a negative location factor. Also, if somebody lives on a road that has a double yellow line, it's 2 lanes, 4 lanes, if you live on Roslyn Road, that should say major highway. That's a negative location factor. So that should be reducing your market value, reducing your assessment. There are also positive location factors. One would be water view. So if somehow you see water view and you don't have a water view, that means that they're actually adding value to your property that doesn't exist. You have to get that corrected. Another positive location factor would be waterfront property. A waterfront property, they add a premium. They add a lot of taxable value for that. So it's on here. Also very important, the style of your home, the model. So if you live in a split, it would say split. If you live in a ranch, it would say ranch. If it's colonial, it would say colonial. But you want to make sure that the model, the style is correct, that you're not being assessed. If you live in a split, you don't want all the comps to be colonials. You know, that would probably mean you're being overvalued, and that would be the basis for a challenge. There are other things here. As you see, we underlined, it says CDU. CDU stands for the condition and also the desirability, utility of the property, but primarily the condition. So mostly they say average, because this is, you know, mass assessment. They don't actually do inspections before they do this reassessment. So, you know, in most cases it'll say average unless, you know, previously the owner had gotten that changed. But if you know your home is below average because of structural problems or physical problems or some of the other problems I mentioned, you know, it should be indicated. You know, maybe below average, it might say poor. It'll tell you if the home is made of brick or its frame, etc. And also the year it's built. You want to make sure that the age of the home is correct. Also, it tells you if the home just has central heat or it has central air and central heat. Central air adds taxable value to the property. So those factors are all very important and they have to be correct. On the other side, the top factor, total living area, is the most important factor really on this whole page. So that really has to be correct. So that's the living area of your home, the main floor, the upstairs. That has to be correct. If you have, you know, 1,700 square feet of living area and they have you down for 3,000, then they've made a big mistake in your assessment. So that's the basis for a challenge right there. But you have to get that corrected in order to get your values corrected going forward. The number of rooms is not as important, bathrooms, but it should be accurate. It's not as important as square feet of living area. And separately, it also indicates whether or not you have a finished basement, an attached garage, decks, all those features. So you want to go through this thoroughly and make sure it's accurate. And then you want to look at the sales that were used as the basis for your reassessment and look at those property record cards too and see how they compare. They're not going to be identical, but you know, what they do is that what they're supposed to do is compare and then make some adjustments for the differences between the home that's being assessed and the home that's sold. But this is very important. So this might be the basis for your grievance application. If it is, you use Part D, and also you notify the Department of Assessment, and you can do that through Ask the Assessor, or you can actually go there in person. I don't recommend calling on the telephone to try to work out a problem with your property record card, but you can do it online now with Ask the Assessor. Also, Part D, again, you use that for your attachments. So that's the first part of the homepage of mynassauproperty.com. And as you can see, you should probably click through everything and look at everything now. Make sure you're totally familiar with it. And review your property record card. So the next thing you're going to click after you go through this inventory on mynassauproperty.com is Prognos. So you're going to click that. Remember, that's all the way over to the right. You click Prognos, and you're going to see, you want to see the market values, the sales that we used, I should say, to determine your market value. And then you want to look up those sales, look up those homes, check their inventory, etc. But you can see the actual sales that we used by going to Prognos. So in comparing sales, which we're going to get into a little bit more now, because if the basis for your grievance is not inventory, then it has to be sales. So you have to have a basis to your grievance application. So in most cases, it's going to be sales. So in comparing sales, you're going to look for sales in your neighborhood, obviously, that are lower than your assessment. And then you're going to take out a pad or print them, start listing them or collecting them. You want to use at least 4 sales on your grievance application, 4 or 5. So you want to collect, but you want to collect as many sales as you can. That's going to help your case. If you're filing additional sales, multiple sales as an attachment, you can do that. And again, just make sure on everything you submit as an attachment, you write the tax year 2021, your name, your address, your section, block, and lot. We're going to show you the Assessment Review Commission website next. And as I've said a few times, it's very important when you are comparing sales to use the same style. You actually want to find sales that are going to work for you. So the inventory should be very similar. They should be the same style. They should be the same lot size. They should be built around the same time. Within the same school district is better. But really, you're going for similar characteristics, but sales that are going to prove that you're overvalued. And there are plenty of them out there for every single property. So you just have to if you decide you're doing this, yourself, and you're doing this pro se, you have to do your homework and you have to find them. The most important thing when you're looking for sales is to keep in mind the taxable status date. So the taxable status date is January 2nd, 2019. Right now, the best sales would be lower sales in December of 2018. But you want to come in with as many sales around the taxable status date as possible. And if this goes all the way to a SCAR hearing, then you're going to have the opportunity to look at more sales, because remember, that won't be until, April of 2020 is when you can actually file for a small claim. But the hearing may not be until May or June or later. So you'll have plenty of time to look at sales. If you're looking for sales then, you really want to look for sales around the taxable status date. Those are the most important sales. What happens in a SCAR hearing is, you go before a hearing officer who's normally an attorney or someone in the real estate field, someone the court deems as qualified and expert to hear these cases. And the county comes in, or their representative comes in, to defend the value that they put on the assessment roll. They come in with the sales that they used. And you come in, or you come in with a representative, you come in with other sales, and what you're trying to do is knock out each other's sales. That's basically what the hearing comes down to. That's what it boils down to. And then the hearing officer decides whether or not it should be lower or should be kept the same. The best way to knock out the county sales is to come in with your sales that are as close to the taxable status date as possible. That's the best way to do it. And of course, they should be lower. It's not a very long process, these hearings. But the hearing officer's decision is final, and they could actually reduce the values in a SCAR hearing by 25%, up to 25%. The most important thing comparing sales, look for all this, the characteristics, and also always keep in mind the date. We've noticed that, in this reassessment, the sales that the county has used, in many cases, they've used very old sales. That's a good thing if you're filing a challenge. That gives you a very strong case to file a challenge. They've used very old sales, which they've time trended. We've seen reassessments where they've used sales back to 2015. And then they time trended to November 1st, 2018. But, you know, that really, you know, is questionable. It leads to really the opportunity to dispute that. So we've noticed they've used very old sales. They've also used sales very far away from the subject property. So that's the second thing. So if you're looking for sales, you want to find sales as close to the taxable status date as possible, especially if you're preparing for a SCAR hearing. You'll find more. But you also want to find sales within your neighborhood or as close to your home as possible, or definitely within your school district, because we've noticed the counties used market sales, comps, that are, you know, very far away from the subject property. The reason is because they only have 23 assessment neighborhoods. So, you know, and there are 59 school districts in Nassau. So really look for homes, if you're looking for sales, look for homes in your neighborhood or your school district. That will help your case. So there's no question that there is a basis, and I believe a very good basis, a strong basis to file a challenge just based on sales. So they have their sales, they have their 4 or 5 sales, they've come up with their value. You're going to find alternate sales, they're going to prove, you know, that you're overvalued, and those sales are out there. This is completely different than what I've said in the past, even last year. As you remember, when we got to the sales section, I told you most people won't be able to find sales that are going to help your case. Now the opposite's true. So the first place you're going to look for sales is actually on the county's other website, the Assessment Review Commission website. You're going to use the sales that are there to fight the Department of Assessment, believe it or not. We're going to show you that. But also, you have to go to these other websites and put your home in as a subject and find comparable sales. So use these 3 websites, and there might be other websites out there as well, but these 3 you definitely should use if you're doing this work. So write this down. You should use Trulia, Zillow.com, or the Multiple Listing Service LI, MLS-LI website. They're easy to find, and these websites will help you find sales that are going to help your case that you're going to put in your grievance application. So this brings you to the sales section. So remember, for anybody who did this in the past, after Part D, there was a Part E that had to do with the challenging the fractional level of assessment. That's no longer in the form or on the on the computer grievance application. It's gone. So there's no more basis really to challenge that. So they removed that Part E. They replaced it with this, which used to be Part F, but now it's Part E. It's moved up in rank. And it does say it's optional. But if you're not filing a challenge based on a problem with your inventory, this is your only challenge. So it really isn't optional unless you have an inventory case. So you have to put in all the sales information that you find. You have to do your work, do your homework. We showed you those sites. We're going to actually go back in a minute and show you the Assessment Review Commission, their website, and their sales locator, and how there might be sales on there that actually can help your case. But you can see the form actually has space for 3 sales. You should do a minimum of 4 sales, a minimum. So, or more sales. The more sales, the better. And also the attachments, again, if they're relevant, Assessment Review Commission will look at them and they'll act on it. Because not every one of these grievance applications is going to be filed with attachments. Most likely these big firms won't have attachments, and they're going to file, as I said, like probably 85% of them, unless the homeowner makes it known to their representative and representative, you know, incorporates it somehow. I think in the mass filings, because a lot of these big firms have 21, 22, 26,000 clients, they're not going to have the time, even though it was extended to April 30th, to do attachments for everybody. So your attachments will be noticed and they'll be looked at. Assessment Review Commission will look at your attachments. So You could add additional sales as attachments. But don't do 3 sales. Do more than 3 sales. Do at least 4 sales or more that are going to help your case. They should all be lower than what you were valued for. Once you fill out the sales information on Part E, then you come to Part F. So Part F, it's not optional. You have to do it. You have to date and sign the statement of claim and certification, print your name, and then underneath that you have to indicate if you're the owner of the property, or you're filing as an authorized rep, or, in the case for a Class 1 condo, if the board's filing, they would click Condominium Board of Managers, but you have to indicate, what your status is underneath your signature. So Part F is not optional, but once you do that, these parts of the application, you actually have an application that's ready to go. So we're just going to mention again about the filing period. And now we're going to show you the Assessment Review Commission itself, their website. They also have some very valuable information on there that's going to help you. And if you decide to file online, that's where you file. So to get to the Assessment Review Commission's website, you either can do it the old-fashioned way. You can go to Nassau County's website at www.nassaucountym.gov, and then go to Departments, and then go to Assessment Review Commission, and then that will take you to their website. Once you're on the Assessment Review Commission website, you're going to click Arrow, which stands for Assessment Review on the Web, and that's actually where the grievance application is. There's an easier way now to get to Assessment Review Commission from Department of Assessment website, and that's by using Ask the County Assessor, Ask the Assessor. There's a link there that you can click on the side. One would be to take you to the Assessment Review Commission, to their main menu. One would be to take you right to the grievance application by clicking Arrow. So you click Arrow, and that will take you to the grievance application. So just as an overview, filing online, same thing. You want to have your notice of tentative assessed value. You want to have done all these things already. You want to have done your sales research. You want to check the inventories. You need to have done all that information. But most importantly, you need to know the value you're filing the challenge to. One thing we suggest is that people filing online, you get a paper application, you fill everything out on the paper application, and have it in front of you. So have everything in front of you when you're ready to go online. You have everything, and you can just input it. One thing about this ARC website, this Arrow website, it doesn't allow you to do the first 2 or 3 sections and then save and close. You have to actually go through the whole application, submit it, but it does have a feature where it allows you to make revisions. And actually, doing it online, the only way to submit attachments is as a revision. So I'm not sure how much they explain in their instructions before you do it, but the only way to submit attachments is are as a revision. So we're going to show you that in a minute. So anybody who's used the ARC website before, you should have a username and password. And if you don't, we're going to show you how to do that right now. But as I said, one of the features of this program is that you do receive an email receipt once you successfully submit it. And we want you, obviously, to keep that receipt in a safe place. So going back to Ask the Assessor, I think we have that up. We had that? Oh, there it is. Okay. So you can see on the left-hand column, you can just click right to the Assessment Review Commission homepage. You just click that, especially if you've never used this before. And remember, you get to Ask the Assessor on the Nassau County website. It's one of the things you could click there. Also on Ask the Assessor, as I said earlier, this is where you could tell them there's an inventory problem. So if you just look at the page there, If you have an inventory problem, you can now tell them online, so it'll be documented and online, which is a good feature. This is all brand new. So you click that if there's an inventory problem. And as I mentioned, they also said there are some videos that you might want to watch. This has the Nassau County Department of Assessment videos. They explain what they did, the assessment process, why they think it's fair, etc. But so you can watch that for whatever it's worth. And then the ARC website has its own video that actually tells you how to file a challenge, which is, which is good information, and it may help you to refresh. So you need to get to the Assessment Review Commission website, however you get there. And once you get to their main website, you want to click arrow, which again stands for Assessment Review on the Web. So once you get to arrow, they have a home page. Now, if you've never used this before, you need to set up an account. So you want to register with ARC. So you want to click that, register with ARC. And that brings you to a registration page. And right here, yes. So you want to register with ARC. And on the registration page, it's going to ask you your name, your address, your city, state, your phone number, your fax numbers. If you're representing yourself, or if you're the representative for someone else, your email address. It's actually all the information that they ask you in Part C. So once you register with ARC, you've actually completed Part C of your grievance application. Most importantly, you want to create a username and password, so you do that. And at the bottom, it's going to say, there's going to be something there to click to complete registration, so you have to click that, and that actually sets up your account with the Assessment Review Commission. So once you have your account and you have all your information with you, you've done all your research, and you have all your sales information, all the other information that you need to file the grievance application, you're ready to go, and you just click File an Appeal on arrow on the main menu. You click File the Appeal, and that will take you to the grievance application. Now, the parts of the grievance application online are exactly the same as the paper application. The first thing you have to tell this online application is that you are using an AR1 form. That's even above, Part A. So you want to indicate that you're using an AR1 form. It's obviously, it's in their program, so it's for tax year 2020, 2021. And then that brings you to Part A. So again, you have to put in your section, block, and lot, but this time you have to type it in the way it's on your Notice of Tentative Assessed Value, that PARID that we showed you. So you type it in that way. If you don't have it, you have to bring it up. It's pretty easy to find. You can see after the box there, the PARID box, there's a magnifier. You click the magnifier, that brings you to a search screen. So the search screen's pretty easy to use. You actually put in the property's address. You want to put in the number and the name of the street. Okay, let me find it on my. Put in the number, the name of the street. Again, don't use street, road, avenue, east, west, place, boulevard. Any of the things that come after the name of the street, just put the name of the street. Put in the town and the zip code. Click search, and the parcel should come up with the address. So you click that parcel link. It's a link. You click it, and it loads it right into the grievance application, the way it needs it to be with that string of numbers. So you click that first. And then it asks you for the taxpayer applicant's full name. It's a little different than the owner's name. So whoever the applicant is, full name, and then property owner's name. So it's asking two questions. It's a little bit different than the paper application, but you have to answer both questions. So taxpayer meaning the applicant, whoever the applicant is, put that in, and then the owner information goes on the next line. That's, again, the name on the deed. Part B is the same as the paper application. It's asking you for the current tentative assessment, tentative assessed value. That's the 1/10 of 1% of your market value, your new reassessed market value. So you put that number in. You have to have that number. It's on your notice of tentative assessment. It's also on, again, mynassauproperty.com on your homepage once you find your property, but you have to type that number in. It's going to ask you the same question as it does on the paper application. Your estimate of the market value, it's got to be lower than your assessed value. It should be more than 5% lower. So you want to put that in. And then it asks the same question as a property offered for sale or under contract. It's either yes or no. And if it's yes, you put in the price information. Part C, that should already be loaded in. That was loaded in when you registered with ARC, so that's all done. Part D, again, that's optional. This has to do with your inventory, and only if there's a mistake on your inventory or you're challenging your inventory. This is not right. Again, you might be able to challenge your inventory and sales. You might want to do both, but if you're challenging your inventory, you go to Part D, you click display, the whole thing comes up. It's the same thing that's on the paper application. This also has, at the bottom, it also has the other facts, the last part of it. So you can only load in your attachments, as I said earlier, as a revision. So you're going to go through the initial application and submit it, and then you're going to go back and you're going to click Make Changes and Revisions. Then you're going to go back to Part D and you're going to click Change. And then at that point, you're going to upload your attachments. I understand there's PDF attachments, but if there's a problem, you may want to get help with the Assessment Review Commission. Anyway, so Part D is optional. Part E has to do with sales. So, we skipped actually a link on ARC's homepage that says Sales Locator, but Sales Locator actually allows you to look up sales using your home as a subject of an assessment and to look up comparable sales, but they're not going to be the same sales that are on the Department of Assessment. Or if they are the same sales, they might be adjusted completely differently for some reason, which I still don't know, but it's very interesting. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But you could also use, in some cases, you could use sales that we use to come up with your assessment as the basis for your challenge, using ARC's adjustment method versus assessment's adjustment method. Anyway, once you get to this part of the application, you should have the sales, that you want to use or need to use in your grievance application, but you can use the sales locator first. So if you go back to the ARC homepage, and you can see there's a link for sales locator. You just click that. There's a property search. Same thing as in Part A. And if you don't know the section, block, and lot of the property, again, is that string of numbers. You just click the magnifier. You do the same kind of property search, and you click the link. That'll load it into the sales locator. So it's very interesting. I mean, you really should do this first before you do your grievance application, but we've found all kinds of things that are questionable using this. So using the home, a home as the subject of an assessment on the Assessment Review Commission's website, on this arrow sales locator, you put in a property, you put in your property first, and then you want to click Find Sales. So you want to find sales that would be used by the Assessment Review Commission to kind of, because they're supposed to do their own assessment, their own reassessment when they determine whether or not your challenge should be reduced or not. So you want to see what sales they might use. So you click Find Sales. Once you click Find Sales on Arrow, you're going to see all different sales. But in some cases, you may actually see the same sales that was used on Prognos on the Assessment Review Commission website, only adjusted differently and with a final adjusted price that's different. So we're going to show you that. So this home that you see is an example that we found, 702 Foch Boulevard in Williston Park. When you put this in the Assessment Review Commission program, the Arrow Sales Locator, it comes up with these 4 sales. One of the sales, you can see it says 72 Brunswick Avenue, Williston Park. And you can see the date of the sale is February 12th, 2018. And then it's time adjusted to the taxable status date, January 2nd, 2019. At the very bottom, you know, and you could see that some adjustments are being made for the differences between 72 Brunswick and 702 Foch. But at the very bottom, you could see an adjusted sales price. That would be one of the 4 values used to come up with the reassessment for the subject. So you can see it says adjusted to 792, 703. Now, if we look at the exact same house on Prognos, which we did, you can see it's the exact same house, 702 Foch Boulevard, Williston Park. We actually see one of the 6 sales that we used to compute the actual reassessment for this property was 72 Brunswick Avenue, Williston Park. The exact same sale, the sale date, February 12th, 2018. The exact same sales price, $725. Only Department of Assessment time trended it differently and came up with a completely different, higher adjusted sales price, $857, $824. So if you own this home, you know, you would actually want to use that sale as the basis of one of your challenges, one of your sales challenges. So this isn't the only case or the only example that we found this, but you know, they're using completely different methods. Now, Department of Assessment did put a disclaimer about their values and compared to the Assessment Review Commission. There was something on there. Now it's not there anymore, but they basically said something like they're using, you know, their own method for time trending, and it may not be the same method as that Assessment Review Commission uses because, you know, they're completely different agencies. But, you know, we just want to point out that there's a lot of room here to make a challenge, that, you know, the value that they actually are using, that they've assigned to your property, may or may not be correct, but there's definitely a lot of room to challenge it, a lot of room. This isn't a science. It's not even a junk science. It's just a mass estimate of market value, and there's a lot of room to challenge. And, you know, what's ultimately going to happen is that the people who are more proactive, who are going to challenge this every year, you know, with a reasonable challenge, over time they're going to stay on the curve. You know, they're not going to end up paying more than their fair share. It's the people who, you know, we saw over the last 8 or 9 years who, you know, aren't paying attention and don't do anything. In the end, they kind of fall behind. And, you know, it seems like the same thing, you know, will happen because these challenges will ultimately be successful, you know, over time. And because there's a lot of basis to challenge. You know, it's not a frivolous thing and it's not a frivolous claim. Everybody has a right to do it, and they should do it because, you know, we know from history, we know from past history, we know since this has been going on since the early 2000s that, you know, the values may or may not be accurate, but most likely, more so than not, they probably aren't accurate. So you know, it's good that you're, you know, here and that you want to get in front of this. You may or may not be successful the first year. The county may ultimately win. They may be able to defend the value that they put on your property, and you may not be able to overcome that. But that doesn't mean that over time you're not going to come up with the right value. So they're going to keep doing reassessment every year for the foreseeable future, just like they did in the 2000s. And they're supposed to adjust the market based upon whether it's increasing or decreasing. But there's always going to be, a reasonable case to be made that the value is not correct. So anyway, once you get through this section on the doing this online, you want to load your sales into the section. It allows you to load 4 sales in. You could use ARC sales. You could use sales that you found. And if you want to add more sales, you're going to add those as attachments by going into Part D and putting them in as a revision. But when you come to the last screen, same thing as the paper application. You want to sign the application. The way you do that is they show you a string of letters. You type in that string of letters, and then you click submit the application. So as I said, this program does have a feature where it does allow you to make revisions. And that's very good. I mean, you have to use it to submit attachments, but if you feel that you're not satisfied with the sales that you used and you want to change it, or after you file you come up with better sales and you want to change it, you can do that. The only thing is normally at the end of the filing periods, the big firms are uploading all of their challenges. They pretty much wait till the end. So in past years, the last 10 days, it's been very difficult for people to file their grievance application without getting knocked off or without, not being able to get on. We're not sure if they've, solved all the problems and nobody's going to have a technical problem at the end. But, in the past, it's always been better not to wait till the end. So if you decide to file yourself and do it online, it's best not to wait until the end, which this year is going to be April 30th. So you have plenty of time to do your research, and you have plenty of time to decide how you want to do this, and if you want to hire somebody to represent you, or if you want to do it yourself, and then, if you're not successful, hire somebody to represent you for SCAR, or just do everything yourself if you have the expertise. I recommend that, if you're a novice at this, so you don't have a lot of experience in market values and in trending, recent sales and things like that, which most people don't, that you do consult some experts, or at least, consult people that who are professionals that might be able to help you with your grievance application. There's no harm in asking a friend or a relative, for advice or help. Most likely they're not going to charge. So it is always good to get advice before you go. There are ways to submit better applications. Obviously, with the more information and the stronger, your sales data, the stronger your case is going to be. But anyway, no matter what you decide to do, you should decide to file a challenge this year and in all future years. Anyway, I want to thank you for listening to my presentation. We're going to stay and answer some questions.